Hey guys, recently there's been a lot of talk amongst some of the brothers and sisters that I fellowship with on YouTube about the topic of preterism. Um, it's no secret. I mean, a lot of people have made videos on it, and when it was first introduced to me, I gave it a good look because I wanted to know. Like I said, if all things have been fulfilled, like I said, preterism is the belief that at 70 AD, all things were fulfilled. That's if you're a full preterist. 70 AD is the due date. Nothing can be fulfilled after that date. Um, Literally nothing. All right, and one of the things that I found initially was that, hey, it seems like preterism has something good, and that's when I'm only looking at the text that the preterist puts forth as proof. But then when I start looking at other texts and I start looking at other places in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, it seems to start getting cluttered. It starts to get a little problematic for me. And so that's why I'm continuing to study it. I'm just having an issue trying to gel some of these things together with that idea. Um, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. This video is not going to be exhaustive. It's not going to be everything that I find to be an issue with preterism. I don't want to make extremely long videos. Maybe I can break it up. But in this one, I'm just going to give a few of the things that I feel like cause an issue with preterism. And I want to open myself to be corrected by anyone that can explain these things to me in a legitimate fashion. So I'll start out with 2 Corinthians 5. Starting out, it says, this is Paul speaking. It says, for we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Okay, I'm assuming here, and I think it's a safe assumption, that by tent, Paul means the body. Making a comparison here between living in a tent and living in your physical body. All right, and if this tent or physical body is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. So there's another building that he's making a comparison here that's eternal in the heavens. So not really a problem so far. And then it goes on to say, for in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling. Okay, and that's it. To me, that's where that wording starts to make it interesting, because before it was kind of saying, verse 1, if you took that verse in isolation, it could be interpreted, in my opinion, as possibly a spiritual death. And let me backtrack for a second. These verses that I'm going to be speaking of address the resurrection. And in preterist concept, the resurrection is spiritual, and quite naturally it has to be, because no one has been resurrected physically, and no one's going to argue that. So if we're going to say that all prophecy is fulfilled, and resurrection being one of those serious prophecies, and it was fulfilled at 70 AD, then there has to be an alternate understanding of what the resurrection is, other than the typical understanding, which is a physical bodily resurrection. So what happens is the preterist is taking a spiritual resurrection position. All right, you're not resurrected physically, but you're resurrected spiritually. All right, and that is what I'm kind of addressing, or I'm having an issue with in these verses. I'm trying to reconcile that idea with some of the things Paul is saying. So I probably should have led with that. Forgive me. But anyway, going to verse 1, like I said, it's saying, this earthly home is destroyed. Okay, there's let's say that's your physical death. And then it says, but we have a building from God, not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Okay, so that could be a spiritual resurrection. All right, you obtain a spiritual body from the heavens, eternal in the heavens. But then Paul goes on to say, for in this tent we groan. So now we're back to the physical tent, all right, because that's the one we're groaning in. In this tent we groan. I don't think we would groan in the spiritual tent, all right, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling. And see, the wording of that, to put on the heavenly dwelling. It's not saying swap it out or exchange or put, this tent aside to get a whole new tent that has nothing to do with the previous one. It's saying that you still have this tent and you put on a heavenly dwelling. You put it on. Okay, so you're still not doing away with the original body, if I'm understanding this correctly. And to this point, I don't know how else to read that. Okay. Again, I'm open for correction, but like I say, you would have to explain what he means here if we're not talking about anything physical and it's spiritual. All right. So anyway, if indeed by putting it on, so there it is again. He says again, if indeed by putting it on, we may not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent, that would have to be physical. I don't know how else you could read that. For if in this tent we groan, so there it is again, we're groaning in this tent, being burdened, so there it is again, that's got to be the physical body that, we deal with while we're on earth. Not that we should be unclothed. So now we've kind of switched parables here. We've gone from a tent, home dwelling parable to a clothing parable. All right. Not that we would be unclothed. So not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed. So there it is again. It's going back to the whole putting on thing. We're not saying that I'm going to take this shirt off and put on a new one. We're saying we're going to put a jacket on top of it. We're going to be further clothed. So we're not doing away with this blue shirt I have on. We're adding a jacket on top of that. Okay? And that's going to be further clothed. And then it says, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. So it would seem that this thing we're going to put on is going to make what's mortal not so mortal anymore. Okay? I don't know how else to see that. And so if anyone out there who is a preterist can explain what I'm not understanding about this, that would be great. And I mean, don't just say, well, it can't mean that because the resurrection is spiritual. I mean, suffer with me. Give me an explanation, okay, as to why I'm misunderstanding this. Don't just blow over it with, well, Jesus said such and such, and so that makes your understanding incorrect. I mean, because you're just kind of, you're not really dealing with the text. Like I'm asking someone to actually deal with the text and explain this to me. All right, and then it goes on to say, he who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. Okay, so the Spirit is a guarantee. And I mean, you look back at Pentecost. All right, that would be an example, I guess, of the Spirit being a guarantee. He's proven that by, first I'm going to give you the Spirit, and later we'll do the whole resurrection thing. So if you believe in a spiritual resurrection, I'm having a hard time understanding 2 Corinthians chapter 5, those first 5 verses. In addition to that, you can go into 1 Corinthians 15, and much of 1 Corinthians 15, I believe, is problematic for preterism, but for brevity's sake, I'm going to try to stick with this theme of putting on. And, maybe I'll do another video where I talk about the whole chapter, 1 Corinthians 15. But for this, we talk about 2 Corinthians. Here it is in 1 Corinthians, where Paul's using the same language, okay? It says, this is verse 53, for this perishable body must put on the imperishable. To me, someone who is thinking, I'm not going to be in this body anymore, it's going to be a whole new thing. This body is done. Once it's in the ground in the grave, it's done. All right? When I get raised from the dead, it's going to have nothing to do with its physical body. So if this is what this guy is thinking, why is he not eliminating it? Like he's saying, for this perishable body, the one that goes in the grave, must put on imperishable. You put it on. Put it on what? Put it on the perishable body. You take the imperishable and put it on the perishable. making it therefore imperishable. So then it goes on to say, and this mortal body must put on immortality. So there it is again. When the perishable puts on imperishable and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? All right, and that's from the Old Testament. Which is another thing. I mean, I've seen a lot of the preterist guys saying that you can't spend time trying to understand Old Testament prophecy because the apostles and Christ explained what those prophecies mean. Okay, and some of the times I feel like you don't want to deal with the Old Testament text because it's problematic or it doesn't make any sense really in light of preterism. So to say, okay, we're not going to deal with the Old Testament, we're just going to have an understanding that the apostles and Christ explained it. Well, I mean, even with that being the case, look at Paul here. He's taking an Old Testament prophecy. I'm not sure where is that coming from? Looks like that's out of Hosea 13:14, I guess. That's what this is saying anyway. But anyway, that's an Old Testament prophecy talking about death being swallowed up in victory. O death, where's your victory? O death, where's your sting? And Paul is saying that when the perishable body puts on, and I cannot emphasize that enough, it's saying when he puts it on, not exchange it, not swap it out, but when it puts it on, when the perishable body puts on the imperishable, and the mortal body puts on immortality, when the perishable puts on imperishable, when the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written. Okay? Here's Paul is telling you what that passage means. When we become immortal because we're given our immortal bodies, that's the way I'm looking at this. So anyway, I'm going to move on from that. I think I've made my point on why this is giving me an issue. All right, and there's probably going to be some people that are going to take this video and say, Serge trying to refute preterism, and I'm not. What I am trying to do is give anyone is just explain how this makes sense in light of preterism. I mean, because I've heard it vehemently said over the course of the last, well, I guess since May-ish, this whole thing's come out, that preterism makes so much more sense of Scripture. And to that I would say yes and no. I would say yes, it makes a lot of sense of some Scripture. It most certainly does. But then there's other Scriptures where to me it makes no sense at all. It makes it incoherent and just destroys it from it if my understanding of these said Scriptures is correct. And I keep saying if, because if I am wrong, I am more than okay at being corrected. I'm just asking, can this be explained to me? Okay. Moving on, I guess I'll look at Romans 8:11 for a second. Romans 8:11 says, if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his spirit who dwells in you. Give life to your mortal bodies. I mean, I don't even know what to say. Like, I don't understand that. All right, I don't understand that if the resurrection is spiritual. Okay. Moving on to 8:13. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. If by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, okay? And the reason why I'm going over that is because when you go into the Greek, the word for body is Strong's word 4983, and it means body, flesh. Okay, I guess that's pronounced soma. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, so forgive me on that. But that word is what Paul uses in 8:13 to say, put to death the deeds of the body. I don't think anybody's going to hear say that this is a spiritual body. We got to be talking about physical here, okay? Paul's using this word to describe the physical body, okay? 4983, that is the Strong's number that Paul is using to describe the physical body. And when you go back to Romans 8:11, the verse I just read prior, if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his spirit who dwells in you. Spirit of God is going to give life to your mortal bodies. The same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead in his mortal body. That same word, that same Strong's number is used to say mortal bodies. Okay? I don't, like I say, I don't really understand this. And then, the word mortal, subject to death. That is the definition of that word. That's Strong's 2349. So Paul's using these same two words literally within two verses of another to talk about the physical body. And he's saying that, I want to read it again, put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. All right, so the deeds of the body. And then that same word he's using to describe how the same way Christ was raised from the dead, he will raise your mortal bodies. I don't understand. All right. Later in the same chapter, in 8:23, this has been brought up by others, but I guess I'll mention it as well. Paul says, and not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we will eagerly, as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. The redemption of our bodies. And you would guess it, the same word he used in the other two verses to talk about the body, which is flesh, all right, which is the human physical body. He uses it here to say that he's looking for redemption of that physical body. What is the point in Paul saying this? If Paul, divinely inspired, apparently, is speaking of a spiritual resurrection, this verse makes no sense to me anyway. I don't understand this verse in light of a spiritual resurrection. All right, the redemption of our bodies. Why does Paul even care about the redemption of our bodies, the flesh, the human body that goes in the ground, if he knows that the resurrection is in fact going to be spiritual? So you would have to say, well, it would seem like you would have to say that Paul was unaware of said spiritual resurrection, and he was speaking in ignorance of that. Or at least that's the only way I can see it explained, which, of course, that will cause a lot of problems in a lot of different ways. So I'm just looking for a legitimate explanation to that. Okay, and I'm trying to be legit in my concerns when we talk about the resurrection here. I think I have legit concerns, and I think that if a person is a full preterist and feels they have it all understood, then explain it to me. I don't know why that's a thing that I can't ask. Anyway, as far as the resurrection is concerned, that's some of it. I'll talk about more in later videos or video. I don't know how many I'm going to do. I haven't really planned this out. I'm just kind of winging it, I guess you would say. But as far as resurrection is concerned, that's one thing that gets me. If there's anybody out there in the Unitarian community that wants to help me understand the resurrection being spiritual in light of these passages, and I will say again, these are not the only passages, but I'm 22 minutes in this video, and I'm not trying to do it too long, and it's 3:50 a.m. where I live. Just make a vid, send me an inbox, email, whatever. I mean, because I'm trying to understand, because there's some people out there that are just all about preterism, and I am having a hard time understanding how you can grab hold of preterism so strongly in light of some of these things. Um, I'm not closing the book on preterism, okay? But I am trying to say that so far it's been a problem for me. All right, it's been a problem for me to understand. I mean, if I just go based on the so-called time text, or if I go based on the interpretations that I'm giving, yeah, preterism's fine. But when you start getting into things and digging into it, like some of the verses I presented, that's where I start to have an issue with it. Okay. For example, time text. There's some standing here who will not taste death until you see the Son of Man coming in His glory. I believe I'm quoting that mostly correct. And it was said in some of these preterist videos that I watched that, hey, he's saying they will not taste death. Okay? So, hey, if they're dead now, then the kingdom had to have already come. But then, to me, that gets knocked down when you look at the transfiguration. I mean, because it's not like those two things are separated from one another in the writings. I believe Brian even mentioned that it says and, like after it said that and, 8 days later. So it's conjoining these two thoughts. Some will not taste death. And then here comes the transfiguration. And it does it in both Mark and Luke, I believe, if my history is correct on that. So the interpretation there of the preterist interpretation is now false. All right. And that's kind of what I'm saying is, could it be that some of the other time texts are not properly understood? I'm not trying to say based on the transfiguration that all the time texts are wrong, but what I'm saying is, could it be possible? Okay. Could there be a deeper look that needs to go into some of these things before we start attaching ourselves to it for certain? All right, because I'm hesitant. Like I say, if preterism proves itself to be true, that's fine by me. I don't have any emotional attachment to a futurist, historical, idealist position at all. I just don't care. But what I do want is to understand the truth of the matter. And full preterism and the resurrection are not going hand in hand right now. All right. So I'll end with that. I've kind of rambled on quite a while here. I tend to do that. It's late, so who knows what I'm going to do when it's late. But anyway, thanks beforehand to anybody who decides to lend a helping hand on some of this stuff if they are maintaining a preterist position. I wish everybody the best. Shalom.